Welcome to LeaderCast, episode 289. As of 2023, at least 28.2% of all full-time employees work a hybrid model. So here's my question from that, Tim. What impact does remote work have on Christ-centered leadership?
That's a great question, because the first thing I think about is that even in my office, where we used to be in the office every day, it's not every day anymore, but yet the work still gets done. And then I'm thinking about how I'm interacting with people. If you give me a choice, I want it to be face to face, but hey, you don't have to be in presence with anybody anymore. You can be face to face on a screen and talk with people. And it's better than texting, and it's better than telephone. So some of this remote work is helpful, I think.
There's a transition that we're experiencing right now of what does hybrid work look like, and what does it mean? And I think we've probably been experiencing those shifts in relationships for longer than we anticipate. And Tim, I think you've got something to share with us that might help us understand that shift a little bit.
Yeah, I think so. We've talked about this being front porch and backyard space. And this is what the Smithsonian describes the transition from the front porch community space to the backyard. It could be that the shift to remote work for almost a third of our population is having a similar impact. Would you agree?
I think you're onto something. So here's the shift, how the Smithsonian described it. After World War II, people began moving out of congested cities and into newly built suburban developments that included private backyard spaces. The adoption of the 40-hour work week, a shift from blue-collar jobs to white-collar jobs, and an increase in disposable income meant that people had both time and money to embark on some of the DIY projects. The result was a uniform backyard that was transformed into personalized havens devoted in part to rest and recreation. They then continued. Suburban tract housing and large-scale developments began popping up in open spaces outside cities, characterized by a change in the style of houses being built. Modern ranch houses were going up quickly and inexpensively everywhere. Front porches and stoops were stripped from designs, fundamentally changing the focus of community interaction. Socializing migrated from the front of the house around to the backyard, and the ubiquitous fence and more private invitation-only socializing became the popular norm. When I read that, I had just had a conversation with my mom. Now, this wasn't right after World War II. The home that I grew up in, my parents purchased in the early 70s. And my sister, for some reason, had driven through the old neighborhood. And my mom and I were having a conversation about how our house had a laundry room on the first floor. And because it had a laundry room on the first floor, they were able to have a front porch. And you know what that front porch did for our family? It became the gathering space for all of our neighbors. Kids were playing out in the front yard. That was me. And the adults were all sitting on the front porch. And we were one of the only homes that had a front porch that was big enough to do that.
That's interesting, because the shift is to private, invitation only, and the socialization that changes the focus of community interaction. I mean, that's part of that study.
Yeah, and it's part of what just the opposite of what I experienced as a child growing up, and the shift that has continued to take place. So let's talk about that.
To me, it heightens the importance of building relationships for Christ-centered leaders. It just immediately says our work is to develop relationships.
It sure does. So hear us. We're not here to talk about remote work. We're here to say there's another shift happening in our culture, and we're immersed in it. And we need to pay attention as Christ-centered leaders to what it invites us to tend to in being the church. And Tim, you named the first one very clearly, our relationships.
Yeah, we need to focus on building relationships with people in our community. So let's just think for a minute about the relationships that you already have, friends, neighbors, acquaintances from work. Statistics tell us that there are between 20 and 50% of the people who live around us don't have a church home.
May I interrupt you for a second
Yes.
there? That statistic always cracks me up because what it says to me is we really don't know. And we're questioning, are some people lying about really showing up in church? Because now, on a more serious note, when you look at the statistics, the percentage of people that say that they attend a weekly service and then the actual data don't match. That's why that number is so large.
And you're right, Sarah. The point is that there are people around you who do not know and have not experienced the love of Jesus. They don't have any memory at all of the love of God that we talk about in Jesus. So what we're saying is you need to get to know them. And perhaps you have family members who are not in relationship with Christ in the church. You need to engage them. It's part of what the work is now of being a follower of Jesus in the world in which we're living.
So I wonder what might happen if we lived in such a way that people are attracted to our lifestyle of generosity, our character of compassion, our love, our care for every person. Another quick story. I was texting with my nephew who just moved to New York City, and one of his comments was, "I'm surprised at how unfriendly people are here." And the fact that he noticed the difference in behavior speaks to that he's in very different context than he's been used to. So what would happen if we lived in a way that sparks questions about our motivation and the way that we love one another? What would happen if we live in such a way that attracts people to say, I want to get to know you. And then as we build relationships, we don't shy away from being followers of Jesus. Yes, all of this means focusing more on relationships with people beyond our church walls.
So, Sarah, what that reminds me of is I had a conversation once with a school teacher who taught in an alternative school. And these were students guaranteed an education, but were suspended from the regular classroom because of drugs, alcohol, behavior, some even for weapons. And this teacher, in one particular occasion, had a set of twins who, when they were in class together, created great chaos. So they were in different classes, but attended the alternative school. And what this teacher did in terms of developing those relationships that we're talking about and treating people with care and respect, and I would say leading with love, every time one of the students had a birthday, she brought a birthday cake and they celebrated by having a party. Well, these twins, it was time for them to have their birthday. And I think one of them said they wanted chocolate cake instead of the regular cake because they knew their birthday was coming. Teacher kind of laughed at that. But on that one day, on that birthday, she had two birthday parties, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, one for one boy, the afternoon for another boy. And nothing else about it. It was just birthday celebration. She did that with all the students until after class that day, before they went home. They came to her and they thanked her for the birthday party. She said not all the students ever came and thanked her for birthday parties, but these two did. And she said, you're certainly welcome. And they said, we've never had a birthday party before. And she said, I can't believe that. You're 16 years old. You've never had a birthday party before. No, we don't know where dad is and mom stays high or drunk most of the time. We won't even have a party when we get home tonight. And before the teacher could say anything, one of the boys spoke up and said, "We wish you were our mother." Now, when you say living your life in such a way that people want to be related to you or talk with you, I mean, you don't have to buy everybody a birthday cake, but you get the point. You're loving people the way God in Christ has loved you. You give people worth regardless of whether you agree or disagree with them. You're helping people become who God created them to be. And they'd say, "Well, I'd really like to be a part of who you are." That's what we're talking about.
It sure is.
So related to that then is falling in love with your context again. That's where you were going. And Sara, part of what you've talked about and is that we just begin to walk the streets of the neighborhood, the community. We visit the businesses. You get to know the people who are there. And then you nurture the relationships in the community. And you kind of interpret the culture because you learn the language of the neighborhood. And an example of that is, and this was a big one for me because I grew up in Appalachia. Do you drink soda? Do you drink pop? Or do you just drink Coke? Do you bring your lunch in a bag or do you bring your lunch in a Poke?
So what is it in Appalachia?
I think we just call it pop.
Yeah, it was pop in Michigan. And then one of my college friends grew up in the Northeast, and she always called it soda and retrained me to start calling it soda.
But there are others, we always wore pajamas, but I know of people that call them pajamas.
Or PJs.
Or PJs. The point is you're interpreting what's happening around you through the eyes of faith, and it takes practice. This isn't something you just say, "Well, I'm going to start doing this." You begin to look and you begin to listen. And what I would say is you listen for the voice of God in the voices of the people, and you begin to look for where God shows up by just simply asking yourself, where did I witness Christ's presence today? Where did I see Jesus? And what did I experience that God's love can embrace? That's falling in love with the community, with the context.
Yeah, so here's an example. I was driving down, and most of the drive was on the highway. I was heading down to Lancaster and was on the phone having a conversation with my mom most of the way. And then when I got off the highway, I came to a railroad crossing, and I paused and I stopped. And if I'm honest, I was annoyed because there was a train that was coming through and it was stopping me from moving on to where I was going. But in the midst of stopping at that railroad track, I had an opportunity to look around at my surroundings. And I almost missed right behind me. And the only reason I caught it was there was a glimpse of sunshine on my rear view mirror. I almost missed beautiful rolling hills being touched by the sun, and I couldn't help in that moment but think about how God's love and light is shining on every person and every family who was calling that neighborhood that I was in home. And then when the train passed, the theme continued. Because as I made a turn, there was a newer housing development, followed by a care facility, followed by several churches. And I couldn't help but think of the many, many ways that God was showing up in the lives of people throughout that community. And I was heading to a meeting with a group of them. Sometimes it's simply in the ordinary moments that we stop and take a look around and ask the question, okay, God, where are you at in the midst of this?
So, Sara, I'm thinking that together interpreting the culture and being attentive to the movement of God can lead you and the church toward loving the people in your community. But let's go back to something we said earlier. It doesn't happen because you say, this is what I'm going to do. It takes practice. So you ready for the final reminder?
Absolutely.
Help people live their faith in daily life. To value the whole people of God, we've got to begin to help people live their faith in daily action, the way they live every day. So as you gather on Sunday and you scatter on Monday, think of it as sending missionaries into businesses and schools and daycare centers. Think of it as sending missionaries into police cruisers and delivery trucks and courtrooms. I mean, the list is as long as there are places in the world. Oh, that's because the mission field's outside the door now and not someplace else in the world.
Yes. So wherever you go on Monday, and it might be your home office, it's your mission field. And that means your neighborhood's your mission field. So as you go, look with the eyes of Christ, listen with the heart of Christ, and speak with the love of Christ. It's not how the working world behaves 100% of the time, but who is saying that you can embody the love of God that we know in Jesus wherever you go?
So like we said, we need some help. We may need to practice. So one way is pay attention to God's movement in our lives. That maybe you'll just set your cell phone alarm to go off at a specific time of day. Covenant to pray at lunchtime for your coworkers, or bless one person every week. Or maybe you'll just simply ask at the end of every day, where did I see God's presence today? And then give God thanks for what you've experienced and ask God to do it again tomorrow.
And over time, you'll begin to see ways to live out your faith at work. Ask yourself how to be a blessing in these situations. Perhaps when a coworker receives a cancer diagnosis and needs a ride to their chemo treatment, or your team leader is caring for aging parents. Perhaps a baby will be born or someone will move. Whatever you do and whoever you are, the point is to embody the love that we know in Jesus Christ. Then you'll be well on your way to embracing the challenges of the missional church.
And as you start falling in love with your context, and we're saying it as all over again, because we've assumed that you've been in love with the community at one time or another. You're building relationships with people in your community. You're living your faith and daily living. Expect to be challenged. And maybe more importantly, expect to encounter the living God that we know in Jesus Christ. I mean, falling in love with your community is that you're beginning to look for the ones that you love and the one who loves you, and his name is Jesus. So expect to become more who God created you to be through practicing falling in love again.
That's a good word, Tim Bias. Do you have any additional thoughts that you would like to share with us as we end this episode?
I can think of a lot of things, Sarah, but one of them that transformed my life is my oldest granddaughter just this past spring graduated from high school and just in the last few weeks started college. She's a freshman in college. At times like this, I always think about when she was born. Kim and I, my wife and I, lived in Peoria at the time, and my son and daughter-in-law were in Parkersburg, West Virginia. It's a 9-hour trip. We get a call that the baby's on its way. So the idea was that when she was born, we would be there. Kim definitely wanted to be there. Dad, me, I'm thinking they're too young to be doing this. But we got in the car, drove 9 hours to get to Parkersburg, and got there before the baby, Alexis, was born. Evan came out. We waited in a waiting room. Evan came out and said, I'll get you when I can, because our daughter-in-law, Nikki, was in labor. So we sat and waited, and I groused around because we'd traveled all this time, and we both were concerned. And I've said this to Evan before, I'll say it now, and that was, he's about ready to become a father, and he's never been responsible for anything in his life. So how's he going to be a father? My wife and I are talking about this, and then all of a sudden he comes to the door. Had never experienced him this way before. He had tears in his eyes. And the first thought I had was, oh no, something's wrong. Because I've not seen him this way before. He says, the baby's born, and you all can come back and see her. And because he's emotional, my next question was everything okay? And I remember his words being, she's perfect. So we go back, and I get to hold this little baby that's just minutes old. Felt like she could fit in my hand. But I remember reflecting back upon that, and I remember the love that just kind of overtook me at that moment. I'm saying it was love because it was just something I'd never experienced before. I was now a grandparent. Everybody that stuck a picture in front of me for years after they became a grandparent said, isn't that a beautiful baby? And I'd always say it's a baby. But now I was experiencing it. And what I asked God to do after that was I was reflecting upon it, that God would help me love the church as much as I felt love for that little girl. And that I asked God to help me help the church love the community as much as the love I was feeling at that moment. And the focus that day was not about me, and it wasn't about my son or my daughter-in-law. It was about falling in love all over again. And it was a baby that brought that about. And I began to think, isn't that the story? It's a baby that helps us fall in love with the world again, with our context, with people. And to wrap all that up then, if I can do so, knowing that you've already gotten the point, and that is when Jesus is the focus, loving the community is pretty easy.
That's a good word. So, in the midst of all of the changes, may your focus be on the baby so that you can once again fall in love with your context. Thank you for that, Tim, and thanks for joining us for episode 289. As a reminder, you can find show notes for this episode at transformingmission.org/289. And remember, who you are is how you lead. Bye for now.